Awesome. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Carolyn Merrill. I head up Instagram's policy programs. I also serve on the My Friend's Place Emerging Leadership Council, and I am so jazzed today to be here and talk with these incredible panelists. This is the second installment of My Friend's Place, A Time to Listen, and the conversation today is called Out and Unhoused. We are going to be talking about the intersections of queerness, homophobia, transphobia, and youth homelessness. But before we dig into that light topic, I just wanted to introduce My Friend's Place to people who don't know about this incredible organization who has been around for 30 years. They are in the heart of Hollywood, and they are a resource center for youth who are experiencing homelessness. The thing I love about My Friend's Place is that they use the arts to really bring young people in, to make them feel safe and to show them that they have an identity outside of being or experiencing homelessness. They don't think that homelessness is an identity. They think that it is an experience, and you can come in and you can come as you are. You can bring your dog. You can just come in and know that you will be fed. You can have a shower. You can get clothes, but you can also try out the incredible space in the Cirque du Soleil room and learn how to take trusts and risks in a safe environment, or do the recording studio that is graciously provided by Miley Cyrus. There's also incredible parenting options and classes for people who find themselves in that place in their life. And I just think they're awesome and incredible, and please find out more about them. So that's who My Friend's Place is. I would love to go around and talk to the panelists and have them introduce themselves. And again, Carolyn Merrill, and I use she, her pronouns. So also make sure to use our pronouns when we introduce ourselves. So why don't we start with the person who's closest to My Friend's Place? Kayla, do you mind sharing a little bit about who you are and what you do with My Friend's Place?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Kayla White. I'm the Health and Wellbeing Coordinator at My Friend's Place. Disclaimer, we are right by the 101 freeway, so if you hear motorcycles and ambulance and stuff going by, that's what we do here. Yeah, I'm just super grateful to be here. I know that stepping out and being vocal on these topics is always what we felt, but we're just putting it out there a lot more and being clear about where we stand, so super grateful to be here.
Awesome. I feel like we're in the Brady Bunch if anyone can see these squares. So we're gonna go down to Brian Michael Smith, who has been in my living room as we've been binge watching the L Word, Generation Q again this weekend, but just an incredible actor. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, Brian, and what you're working on and your connection to My Friend's Place?
Yeah, so I'm Brian Michael Smith. I'm an actor and an advocate. I've been doing some great work, I would like to say, as in terms of trans masculine representation. Been able to play 3 trans masculine characters on 3 different platforms of varying degrees. So, I got to play Black trans police officer on Queen Sugar, which is on OWN. I got to play Black trans political strategist on the L Word that comes on Showtime, and I'm working on 911 Lone Star playing a Black trans firefighter that comes on Fox. So I'm really excited to be able to kind of be the representation that I wish I had growing up for other people in that capacity. And before I, really committed full-time to acting, I did a lot of media and youth work. So I worked at the LGBTQ Community Center in Manhattan, which offered similar services to My Friend's Place and access to resources. And I've always had a soft spot in my heart for young people who have felt isolated or alone and needed to have some sort of connection or guidance and to find their own personal power, whether it was through art, whether it was through their own education, or whether it was through community activism. So I found a way to sort of put that together into that work. And I'm excited to be able to, join in here with this panel today to talk about My Friend's Place, which is doing exactly the kind of work that matters so much to me.
That's awesome. We're so glad to have you. And then we will go to Dee Balliet, who works with the True Colors Foundation, currently based in DC, but moving to Philly. Dee, do you mind talking to us a little bit about what you do at True Colors?
Sure. So Dee Balliet, they, them pronouns. I'm a senior program officer at True Colors United. True Colors United has been a long-time partner of My Friend's Place. We focus nationally on advocacy, youth collaboration, training, and education. I would say I got involved with True Colors United probably about 5 or 6 years ago. True Colors United previously had a program called 40 of the 40, which highlighted 40 young people across the country. At the time, that was a more exact statistic that 40% of youth experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ. And so myself and many other great young people made the 40 of the 40 list. But from that, we were able to really kind of harness that power of youth collaboration and move forward with this idea of what became the National Youth Forum on Homelessness, which is now a collective of, I believe, 25 young people from across the country that focus on all things homelessness, from policy, research, advocacy, education, healthcare. So yeah, so that's kind of like my relationship with True Colors United, but then also my relationship to LGBTQ youth and young adult homelessness was, of course, just kind of the avenue that True Colors United provided from youth collaboration to allow young people with lived experience to really not only join the conversation on ending youth and young adult homelessness, but also being leaders in ending youth and young adult homelessness.
I love that. And I was watching on one of your other panels about talking about the importance of saying collaborating with youth and that that power of just even changing that verbiage and making sure that that is shown in the programming. And finally, I will throw to Miss Ashlee Marie Preston. She is an incredible activist for the trans community. She has so many different titles that I'll let her go through. Probably been on every list you can think about. But Ashlee, do you want to tell us, Ashlee Marie, do you mind telling us a little bit about you?
Yeah, so I'm gonna spare us all like the keynote because that's a whole entire separate keynote. But what I will say is I'm Ashlee Marie Preston. I am a media personality, producer, storyteller, content creator, civil rights activist, anything that allows me to bring my experiences and journey to the stage in a way that makes someone else feel seen. I'm all about that. And I am a proud alumna of My Friend's Place. So when you said the thing about homelessness being an experience, not an identity, that really resonated with me as someone who has been a client. I don't even like the word client because I didn't feel like a client. I never felt like that. Like I felt like I was a member of the friend group or like a member of the family. And there was just always this nurturing atmosphere that was always greeting me at the door every time I ever went to My Friend's Place. And amid the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, I launched an organization called You Are Essential, which funds grassroots organizations who work directly with communities who've been disproportionately impacted by overlapping pandemics. So we know that in America, we're addressing the pandemic, the health pandemic, but also there's a race pandemic. And so we're meeting all of those needs simultaneously. And I'm grateful to be on this panel. So thank you for asking me to participate.
Awesome. That gives me chills just the way you talk about the welcoming environment that is My Friend's Place. And I think that that is something so unique about how they don't approach it with a one size fits all. It's really meeting each person where they are. And it's just awesome. So the conversation that we're having today, My Friend's Place is an expert at meeting young people in this crisis situation and providing a safe place to help them really realize their potential and who they are and connect them with a different social worker and really create a plan for young people. But we are also aware that this problem didn't just get there, that it exists in a huge systematic space of why are the people who are predominantly receiving services from My Friend's Place, from the queer community, from the Black community, why is that? We know that this comes from years of getting to that place. And so I think that just to start that conversation, we really want to shed light on that. I think that a lot of people on this call have been working in this space for years. I think that it's so important to have it now because people are finally wanting to listen a little bit. And I think that we need to really show up and to continue to have those conversations. I first do want to recognize how many people, all of the people on this call who have been working on this day in and day out for a long time. So thank you so much for that foundation. I feel so thankful that we now get to have this conversation. to set that, I think it'd be great to just put it into context for people who might not be as familiar in this space. So I was thinking, Dee, we could start with you at really looking at on the national level. What does that look like? What does queer homelessness look like? Maybe we can even some stats around that to really just set us into the context for this conversation.
Sure. So I think when I'll just kind of start off with kind of some of the things that we already know. Queer youth do experience homelessness exponentially more than their counterparts, right? Specifically, youth of color. So, and those are for reasons that most of us kind of know, right? Family rejection is usually still the number one cause for a lot of young people experiencing homelessness. And then coupled with that are usually systemic barriers. And those systemic barriers are still usually not having adequate access to emergency shelters and or not having access to any type of emergency assistance at all. So when we think about numbers though, LGBTQ youth and young adults experience homelessness at about 120%, have about 120% higher risk of experiencing homelessness than their counterparts. And then if you compound those numbers also with depending on their racial makeup as well, or how they identify racially, African American youth and young adults experience homelessness 83% higher, Hispanic youth 33% higher as well. And then you think about that, those numbers are separate, but like I said, if we compound those, right? And so if you're an Afro-Latino LGBTQ youth, right, you nearly have about over a 250% chance of experiencing homelessness, right? And so this study came out a few years ago through Chapin Hall, through Voices of Youth Count. Myself and a few other young people participated in this. But this finally put what a lot of young people that have experienced homelessness already knew into numbers, right? It kind of showed us we weren't just kind of like making these things up, right? Young people were having difficulties accessing supportive family care. Young people were having difficulty accessing shelters or even follow-up, specifically trans youth of color, right, is who we usually see have that biggest impact. And I don't think that we've done near enough studies specifically for trans communities to say like this is how they're navigating this. Sometimes we just kind of loop LGBTQ together and we see that. Overall, I said a little bit earlier that the previous statistic, I believe, was 40% of young people identify as LGBTQ that are experiencing homelessness. And I think just by what we've known and by what we've seen, that number is probably a bit higher, but we'll kind of still go with that just for statistical reasons, that it's still at that 40%. But those are the factors that we usually see. Sorry, those are the numbers, statistics, and the main factors that we usually see that still contributes to youth and young adult homelessness. I'll kind of like separate there and then I'll stop. I think outside of those numbers on the ground, so some of my job is to go into communities and work with communities on rebuilding their homeless systems, and doing so with an allocated amount of money that comes from the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project. And that's a grant that's delivered through HUD and True Colors United. We're one of the youth collaboration partners that administer that. So myself and a team of about 3 others, we go into communities and we literally work with communities to figure out why are young people still having difficulty accessing shelter, and also like how can you use this not really huge bucket of money, but a small size of money, how can that best be used to improve those services? And then, I mean, we kind of take it a step further and ask that communities not decide this for themselves, but actually have youth and young adults that are currently experiencing homelessness or have previously experienced homelessness, that they work with them to come up with the solutions for how that money should be spent and what those new systems should look like. I think it's still pretty early for us to say that we have like any concrete stats that say like this is how much like homelessness has been reduced. But as I mentioned, we focus on youth collaboration. And I would say youth collaboration also means youth leadership as well. And so when we think of all of those barriers that young people are still navigating to be stably housed, so whether it's emergency shelter, whether it's culturally appropriate services, right, when they show up for emergency shelter, whether the transitional living is adequate, whether there's a wait list for housing, whether some states have like these very arbitrary laws where young people have to be reunited with their families, whether or not they want to. That's kind of like a first step that some steps say has to be taken. So sometimes that's reuniting young people with families who may have rejected them and or may still not want them back in their family unit. So I think we have to think about like how some of those barriers still show up and how young people are saying like, we want to combat that. A lot of the times that looks like youth choice. However, there's still plenty of more, I think there's still plenty of more opportunities to figure out how we can end youth homelessness while still allowing young people like that space to lead on those conversations, but also like to just move away from even asking young people to come and collaborate, but just allowing young people to kind of like move into positions of leadership so that those young people experiencing homelessness always kind of like are at the front of the ship, right, guiding how best to move from these statistics of 120% for LGBT youth experiencing homelessness, right, to actually see like a measurable decrease in homelessness overall, specifically for LGBTQ youth. But also, like I said, when you compound those with being Black or African American, and or even pregnant and parenting, or not having a high school diploma, even, those numbers get compounded. And I'll just leave you with two more numbers. So youth with less than a high school diploma are 346% more highly likely to experience homelessness than those who have a high school diploma or a GED, as well as unmarried parenting youth are 200% more likely to experience homelessness as well. So I think when we stop and think for a second of all of those numbers and being compounded for one young person, right, then we can kind of see like the landscape for how youth and young adults experience homelessness, specifically LGBTQ youth and young adults.
Thank you so much. That really was a great dive into seeing a little bit about what these kids are up against. I would love to go to Kayla now to talk about specifically in LA with your work at My Friend's Place, if you have seen other contributing factors specifically for why queer youth are at higher risk.
Yeah, so I think, so disclaimer, I'm going to use the word queer in reference to myself, pronouns she, her, hers. I don't know if I said that earlier, as well as the youth we serve and just the community as a whole. But kind of like Dee was saying, right, those numbers are ridiculous. Queer youth make up more than 40% of the homeless population, which is wild. And then that increases up to 120% higher risk of homelessness compared to their cis and straight peers. I think just sit with that for a second, because that's crazy. And it's something that not everybody has, like, it's not everyone's reality, you know? I think there are traumas that aren't specific to the queer community. I think that just youth in general can be victim to any sort of abuse that's out there. But I think on top of that, there's often this family rejection, the fear of being thrown out of your home or actually being thrown out of your own home that not everyone has to worry about. There's risk of violence in response to either their actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. And also this is LA, right? So I'm literally looking out the window at the Hollywood sign. A lot of people think they come and they're like, you know what, like I can leave this behind, fill in the blank, whatever that is, and create something better for myself, only to come to LA and find that there's not enough of anything for anyone. I'll go a little bit further to say that, especially with housing, the system's not made up for transitional aged youth. It's not made up for youth at all, really. So I think that's where MFP's work comes in, trying to find these little nooks and crannies for these youth to get in, because there's not enough housing for anyone as is. yeah, I think it's an ongoing thing, and there's a lot of systemic stuff that we're not going to be able to solve overnight, but it's constantly finding these ways to get these youth into these different opportunities. And also, I'll go as far as to say that here at MFP, we have 7 core values. I won't list them all, but being strengths-based as well as trust, those are the 2 main things. I have looked at some stuff, and you can hit me up later if you want some references, but just even a tiny bit of acceptance can reduce the risks to half. I think with the youth that we work with, there's increased risk for depression, suicide, sexual abuse, or any of the abuse really, harassment, poorer health outcomes, substance use, and the list really goes on. And it's just, like Dee was saying, compounded on top of the other. Yeah.
I think it's really important to put a face and to humanize the stats as well, because I think sometimes it can feel like a little, okay, it's out there, but like really putting that experience and knowing like a story of what that could look like. And so Ashlee, Maria, if you would feel comfortable, even from either your own personal experience or from just all of your work that you've done in this space, do you mind giving a little bit of color to what that looks like on a day-to-day, either from stories that you have heard or from just like the challenges with housing that Kayla was talking about, with job employment, with all the different areas of just kind of giving color into that, what that actually looks like in the day-to-day, being a queer youth experiencing homelessness?
Sure. Well, I like that Kayla named that, like that identify as queer, because like I typically don't. Like I'm trans, trans woman. It's really interesting. Even like I love that I get to a place where like I can say back in my day, even saying queer was followed by fists. Like somebody was usually coming at you, and so it's been like a beautiful experience to watch other people take back the power from that and own that and to say it with pride. And so like I honor that and celebrate that. Just a little bit about my story though. So I came from Kentucky when I was 19 years old. And I didn't have words to describe trans identity or unpack it. But I knew that I was different, and I knew that whatever truth I had growing inside of me made it very unsafe for me to stay in Kentucky, as you could probably begin to imagine. And so I came out to LA because I just knew that there was all types of interesting people, and I knew that no one would really care who I was, and I could just live fully authentically. I got a job, and shortly after I had that job, I discovered my tribe, other trans folks, and I had language to access and I had resources to access. But what I was not able to access was an understanding of why someone could hate me simply for showing up as who I really was. I started experiencing bullying and harassment on the job. I went to several supervisors, but in many other cases, it was actually my supervisors who were participating and laughing and leading. And when I went to HR, eventually they decided that it was probably much better to fire me because I was deemed a disruption to the environment than it would have been to back me and to stand up for me. And unlike the present moment, we didn't have the Supreme Court deciding that LGBTQ rights should be protected in the workplace as an extension of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And so I had no resources. And even if I did have legal recourse, I wouldn't have known how to access that at 19 years old. What that meant was that I lost my apartment. I ended up becoming homeless, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people who perhaps may not have experienced homelessness who wonder in the back of their minds, like, what would I do? And so on the TV shows and movies, oh, all you have to do is go to a shelter and that shelter will take care of you and, saves the day. But what my truth was is that because I didn't fit into the narrow definition of what it meant to be a woman, the women's shelters wouldn't give me housing or food. I was so desperate for the bare minimum necessities that I was willing to repress my truth simply so that I could survive. And not even the men's shelters would help me, even though I was willing to try to blend in. And so I had no choice but to sleep on the streets of Hollywood, which ended up requiring that I engaged in survival sex work as a basic means of, again, getting food and shelter and clothing and hygiene things. And everything that I had to do in the name of survival completely broke me from the inside out. And I ended up using drugs as a social lubricant to help me navigate that. So right off the bat, all of those stereotypes and judgments that I had about kids like me, because I was a dare kid, and so like I had opinions and thoughts about homeless people. I had all of these like stigma-based notions about what it meant to be a sex worker and all of this. There were even religious organizations who turned me away because I didn't fall into their mission for what it was they were trying to do respectfully. And I'm one of the luckier ones who came through it unscathed. I don't have a criminal record. I don't have a lot of the health disparities and challenges that some of the people who engage in high risk behavior do. Some of those experiences that are reflected in a lot of the data that Dee was talking about. And the other thing is that I still had this, I don't know, there was just this light in me that didn't go out for whatever reason. And so I made it my purpose and my life mission to go back for those who are still navigating the shadows of our society, the people that we overlook every day, the people that we pass and we somehow justify. Maybe they did something to, I don't know, somehow it. And so I've been shifting hearts and minds around how we look at homelessness and also really bringing intersectional dialogue into it to let people know that it's not just about accessing a bed or food. It's not that simple. As someone, again, who's trans identified, my friend's place, I remember the staff sitting with me like an hour after services were closed and people had already exited the building, and they were just there with me to make sure that I could get somewhere. And so we'll talk more about that later, about how to help, but that's my journey. So that's what it looks like. And so what I would just challenge people who are watching to do is the next time you see a homeless person, even if they are engaged in a certain behavior, if you do suspect they are on drugs or they have issues with mental health, it's better to actually judge judge the system that produced the conditions that they're experiencing instead of the choices that they had to make in order to survive.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I realize that you have to share that story a lot. And I know that that requires a lot of energy each time you share that. So I just want to like honor and thank you for sharing that. And I think that there's no way that someone doesn't hear that story and not come away having a deeper understanding of what that's like, and hopefully compassion and inspiration to change. So and to help that system. So thank you so much. And when hearing it put that way, it's almost shocking that the transgender community who finds themselves experiencing homelessness can survive, like with so many damn obstacles coming at you. Like it just shows like how truly heroic each member of this community is in facing and thriving and growing. And you're just such a great example for so many different people watching this. So thank you for sharing that. I think another area is, and also I think so important when we were talking about the policy changes, and I'm so glad that my friend's place is starting to do a ton of work and has been doing work in that space, but the importance of just the census. And I know that my friend's place is great about making sure that we're getting those numbers down so that it can be shown just how many young people are actually on the street. And when I was volunteering during a part of that, a lot of the conversation was talking about the foster care system and what that is like, specifically to just adding another layer into this of what that is like to be someone who identifies as queer and to be in the foster care system. So I think there are a couple of different people who could answer this question, but either Dee or Kayla, Ashlee, Marie, just do you mind giving a little bit more light to what that experience has been like with the different people that you are working with in that space?
Yeah, I think we know that queer youth are overrepresented in the foster care system, and I would love to hope that as soon as they're in the system, they're getting the perfect treatment. They're placed in these perfect homes, but I think we can all assume that that's not the case. I think that queer youth enter foster care for many of the same reasons as their cis hetero peers. So, like we talked about before, abuse, neglect, possibly parental substance abuse, and the list goes on. But we know queer youth to experience this at a much higher rate. And like we said before, compounding that with the family rejection and the violence that could potentially come of that is an added layer of trauma that just kind of comes with the territory, you know? And that could be because of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or just what the hell someone else thinks. I think that this particular population is more likely to suffer from consistent harassment, possibly abuse in the foster care and other systems, some of which we hear about, most of which I feel like we don't. And just something that comes to mind just when we're talking about mental health services, group homes, foster care, and this is rhetorical or not, I wonder how many times a youth has been misdiagnosed when they were just freaking sad, just grieving the loss of their family. And I think that's what I try to tell myself as I approach youth and as I work with them is, let's talk about that basic stuff first if you want to, but losing your family for reasons that are outside of your control could mirror a bunch of different stuff. And it's gonna take a lot more and a lot more care to get there, if that makes sense.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just kind of piggyback on some of that. I think as I've worked with youth and young adults as colleagues that have navigated foster care and also in community, I think a lot of the times it kind of falls on our advocacy as well to really advocate for local government to do better for young people experiencing homelessness, especially when they go into the foster care system. Oftentimes it's like this very transactional thing where a young person kind of like goes of like one of two paths, and either that's I'll try to navigate the shelter system best as I can, and or I'm like defeated and I'm gonna go into foster care. And also like they're just like, we don't have like a lot of national standards for what that training looks like for foster care families anymore. If I don't know if we ever did, and if we do, then I would argue we should probably revisit those and have some of those trainings rewritten by young people who have actually had to navigate what it's like to be in foster care. I think also I'm huge on language. I think language is just one of the basic things we can do to just kind of like show respect to one another. It's sometimes like just being in communities where older adult partners are just kind of like, what the adults say goes, and young people should just, what's the phrase, like be seen, not heard. I feel like that's just like such a huge thing with like older adults, and I know that's tied into power, but like I mean, like we're past that. Like I think like kind of to hell with that at this point. I think it's important that like we understand that we have to, if we're going to hold the foster care system accountable, we have to also provide them with the tools that they need to be more accountable to the young people. I really think that starts with language, even understanding, saying youth or young adults instead of calling, 19-year-olds kids, for instance, or making sure that, we're not just saying, oh, gay youth, and we're blanketing, lesbian, gay, trans youth that identify as queer, right? We've already kind of had that conversation as well. And even just language around like how we're offering services to somebody, right? I think just kind of like I've gotten better at keeping very neutral language in conversation, and also just when addressing different populations, especially when I don't know how someone identifies, especially when I don't know someone's background, right? I think it's way too easy to offend somebody, but it's a lot easier to not offend somebody if you just try. And so I think like we can get so much better with foster care, because being in so many communities where we see like young people that are just so turned off by the foster care system for reasons that Kayla mentioned a lot of the times, and then not having like an adequate response from those who are signing up to be foster care parents, and or those that eventually adopt, or any part of that system, right? And going back to that really just starts with that first encounter of a young person figuring out like, how do I get from experiencing homelessness, either whether I'm on the street or couch surfing with a friend, into being stably housed again. And if there's a better way, right, I feel like we should figure that out and advocate for that for young people. They don't want to go into foster care, they should have to. And if they do want to, and they do end up going into foster care, how can we make that more equitable for that young person, or those young people, specifically the ones who are navigating vulnerability differently than cisgender heterosexual counterparts. So I'm always going to go back to the LGBTQ youth and young adults who are going to be that much more vulnerable and also have to navigate with that much more barriers when accessing stable housing.
And I think it's really important just to address, we've come so far in representation, but we have so much farther to go. And even like, why are we still even just when the coming out itself, like why, like that we just haven't gotten to a place where we can be accepted in that space in the US. And I think that it is so important for people to be that example. And I want to talk to Brian Michael about your experience of coming out a few years ago publicly, as you've been in the acting field for a long time, and just what the response was there and why you thought it was important to do so, and maybe just your journey along the way. Because I do know in working with other organizations like the Trevor Project, of how important it is to tell kids about it, your individual experience and your individual timing for when you could come out, because for some people it's not going to be a safe experience for them to come out. And so maybe it isn't just everyone come out, but it's like really knowing when it's the right time for you in that safe space. So I'd love to hear from you about that journey.
Well, I had an interesting kind of multi-phase coming out process throughout my life. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and there wasn't much of a of like access to language or to like, anything that was related to the LGBTQ community where I was growing up. So I didn't really have that much language of my own. I didn't really know that there was anybody else like me. So for a long time, I just felt different. I didn't have the words for it. So I didn't know even what I would be coming out as. I just knew that what I was feeling wasn't inherently rooted in who I was attracted to. It was more about who I am. So I navigated this sort of like in between space for a long time. And it wasn't until I got to college where I just sort of got to a point where it's like, I can't do this anymore. Like I was very adamant as a young person to assert my identity as male. And I realized that, that's going to lead to alienation. So then I'm just going to be different. And then I got into some weird compromise with my mother that, maybe the struggle I'm having is because I never really tried being female. So then for like a good 2 years, I tried very hard to be female, and I'm like, this doesn't feel right, and I can't really see a future for myself. And unlike a lot of the young people that I've worked with and that I hear about, I didn't have suicidal ideation, but I really could not see a future for myself. And I remember just how alone and isolating that felt. It was like, I never want to feel like this again, but I don't know what to do about it. And I got online and I started to look up information about anything that might have anything to do with me. I discovered, terminology about transgender. I discovered Jameson Green and his book, Becoming a Visible Man, and online resources from people who had written blogs. This was very like early 2000s. So there was no YouTube and there wasn't like, social media and whatnot. So things were still very well, like it was very medicalized and it was very gate kept. And it wasn't necessarily about a transgender identity, but more of a condition. And so my first experience was just that, I'm a man who has, a trans experience or a trans medical condition. I'm going to get treatment for it. And there was a level of comfort with that because it sort of lined up with my own like values and whatnot. But it was difficult for me to navigate the conversations with my family, who was Southern Baptist traditional, because of, what they believed was, well, God's plan for your life. And I, I had to do my own sort of soul searching, like, well, I was born like this. So God's plan for my life involves this journey. So I don't know what we're going to do about that, but I can't pretend that this isn't part of me. And, it took some time for, my mother and, some of my family members to come around, but it wasn't until the unexpected death of the matriarch of our family, where we all in my family just sort of realized we don't have to understand everything about each other. Do we love each other? And that's where we were with it. And so a lot of the sort of feelings that I had that I needed to get away from my family, or that, we couldn't really reconcile, that sort of went away because we were able to sort of hold that. So I was very, very blessed and privileged in that space, that we were able to have that, and that I came to understand my identity in my 20s, and I didn't have to face being rejected from my home, because I already sort of had been on my own, right? And I realized that I didn't like feeling that alone and that left out. And I felt so much more connected to reality and to a future for myself when I actually met real trans men, and how important that was in my life. So I was doing youth work. I was teaching media literacy to young people. And I was, I found out how important it was to be able to tell your own stories, because as someone who was an actor very early on, I had people telling me, like, you're never going to be able to act because no one's ever going to see you for what you think you are. And that really hurt me. So I was like, but if I know how to make my own media, if I know how to produce my own films, I can cast myself in whatever I want, and I can play whatever I want. And I felt so empowered that I wanted to give that to other young people, because I don't want anybody to feel like that. So I was working in Detroit with young people, teaching them how to own their stories, teaching them how not to be as influenced by media, because when you know how it's made, it has less of an impact. You have a choice on whether that's going to impact you in that way. And so I took that principle from Detroit, and when I moved to New York, I ended up doing this work in the LGBTQ community center there in Manhattan. And they have a similar program called Yes, and it was for 13 to 23-year-old young people. And I recognized immediately how important it was for me to be visible, because so many of them were young people of color, and so many of them were, questioning their gender, and they had no connection really to anyone like in real life who was of a Black trans masculine experience. So even though I was enjoying this period of my life where for the first time I'm in a new city and I just got to be accepted as Brian, I had a choice on whether or not I was going to, share my trans experience. I enjoyed that time that I had to just embody my body and my identity, for once, but I recognized it was way more important to be visible, because so many people were suffering, so many young people were suffering without that idea of a vision for themselves. So it's like, if I could be that in this space, that's great. And then I realized I'm having an impact on the young people in this space, which is wonderful. They're having an impact on me. They were teaching me so much. I learned so much more about fluidity, about language, about, not having to be particularly one way of expressing masculinity or expressing femininity. You can be both. You can be, I can be feeling like very masculine and butch in the afternoon, and I could be, feminine up at night. Like, it was okay. And like, so they really taught me that level of freedom, and I appreciated that. And I realized that so many more young people needed to have that, but they don't have access to these kinds of centers. They won't be able to get here. And how could I take what I was learning here and what I had carried with me through my own experience and reach a larger audience? And I was like, that's through my art. So I can't sit here and tell the young people to follow their dreams and not let anything get in their way. And I never really fully committed to my art and my acting career. So I said, all right, I'm going to commit to acting. And if it works, it's great. But in order to sort of get a foothold in the acting world, I realized I had middle school credits on my resume. I need to get my training together, and I had to be a really good actor, because the way that I really wanted to tell the stories, I wanted to show up the best. And I didn't want to be distracted, and I didn't want to be pigeonholed the way I felt I was pigeonholed when I was in college. And, I didn't need to navigate my trans experience in my work at the beginning. I just needed to learn how to navigate the work. And so for the first few years of my career, it was just me learning about the industry, getting better as an actor and as a performer. But the way that I learned acting was it's you break it out, you're working from yourself and your own experiences. So I wanted to be able to use every color in my little crayon box. And so I would use my masculine experience, I'll use my Black experience, and I got to a point where it's like, now I really want to navigate my trans experience and my gender experience in my work. And I'm recognizing that the stories that I am seeing on the media, I'm not seeing what my experience is. And I feel like that's my place in this market. That's my place in this sphere, is to bring what I have experienced and encountered, to the screen, in stories that are realistic with stronger and better representation, that move beyond, the trans tropes that I had seen growing up, where, the trans people were victims, where they were, deceptive people, where they, were killers. They were all these other, everything was rooted in just their trans experience. They were early transition. At this point, I was like 10, 11 years down the road, and I've seen no representation of trans adulthood, of trans parenthood, of trans fatherhood, of Black trans masculine, so I'm like, there's all of this that needs to be told. And I was in a space where I was looking to fulfill that. And I saw Queen Sugar, and I really love the way that Ava DuVernay's tells stories, the stories that she chooses to tell, the people that she populates her sets with. And I just put it out in the universe. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to work on. And, you know, about 2 years later, you know, I got notice about the role for Black trans police officer on her show. And I read the scene. I was like, this is exactly the kind of work that I want to do, because this, even though this character is a police officer, he's a Black police officer down in New Orleans. He's working from within the system to try to undo some of the harm that is in the police force. And he's showing up within his community to support the people in his community. And he's showing up for his cisgendered male friend as a voice of masculine, not necessarily authority, but, you know, how to be a better Black man. He was telling him, like, look, man, if you want your life to be the way you want it to be, you might want to, you know, to take some of this advice. So to be the trans person giving advice to the cis person, expressing gratitude in this way I'd never seen before, I thought it was just incredible. So even though there was a moment where, you know, people on my team were like, well, you know, if you come out now, you know, maybe they'll only see you for trans roles. I was like, that's okay for now. I've done other work. They see that I can play cisgender characters. I can do whatever, you know, comes across the way. But right now there is a need for me to be visible. And I have this voice. I have this platform. I feel like I have the skills now, and I want to do it, and I want to be ready for it. And almost as soon as I said that's what I wanted to do, the opportunities, you know, made their way towards me. So well, here we are.
Goddamn, are we grateful that you did. And I think that segues into nicely. I think sometimes, and I still think there's room, and we could go a few more hours / days to talk about all the different obstacles facing the trans community and the queer community experiencing homelessness. I think that that's powerful to show what are the plus sides of really owning the specific things that make you you. And I think for me specifically, and as a member of the queer community, it's been one of the best things that once you did come out, again, all the obstacles, but also seeing as you cross over into the other side of the avenues that can open up for you.
And I mean, and to be honest, like, I feel like my experience was what it was because because of the timing of whatnot. The way had been paved. You know, Candace Kane had broken out onto TV. Then you had Laverne Cox paving the way. I mean, so there was a lot of work that had been done that made my experience, you know, as positive as it could be. And I was in a place of safety. I was housing secure. I had, you know, people who were supporting me. So I was in a place where I was able to do this, where other people might want that, but, you know, there's obstacles in the way that make it, you know, make it difficult, that make it nearly impossible, where they're still working on their survival, you know? So it's important to I want to put that out there that, you know, what was possible for me was because of the people who came before me, and because I was able to connect to resources in a way that made me feel supported. And having that sense of community and found family, you know, within New York was crucial to me. So having places like my friend's place, where you, even if your own family isn't there for you, you have this sense of found family, you can feel stable to reach out and to kind of go for these more aspirational parts of your life.
And then segueing into that, and Ashlee Marie, who is booked and needs to go, I want to make sure that we have time for you to go to the next panel. What is something, and maybe we'll start with you and then we could bounce. What is something that you wish people knew, or who are working in this space, or just to give, what is the best piece of advice you could give to someone who encounters someone who is trans, who is experiencing homelessness? And that can be from you are seeing them on the street to programmatic wise. What is the best advice that you could give to someone of how to really connect and reach and provide the best help? And maybe that can be paired with a piece of advice for people watching this that you really hope that they take from this to actually act and to support the queer community.
I think I would say prepare yourself to always be in a constant state of updating information. Even as someone who is a trans woman, I'm constantly updating information around non-binary folks and gender non-conforming and what the difference is. And, you know, like there's just always information to update. And so I think that when you're coming from a place of wanting to honor that person's existence versus the need to be right or to get like, you know, high test scores, but like to actually make it about that person, that's always key. Also allowing them to self-identify and not necessarily assigning language. I was lucky to be in some environments where I know like Brian Michael Smith was talking about just being with this community where they could let you be femme, you could be masculine, you could like mix it up, and I think that when it comes to youth and young people, like it's just kind of like you're still trying to figure it out. And so like I think that that's one thing. The other thing is understand that trauma is messy. Again, this is where media and TV gets us in trouble sometimes, because as like people who care and want to help, they set us up with these false expectations around what it truly means to be someone who's been through the ringer. So we expect for them to come to us on their hands and knees and crying and begging for like support and love. Sometimes that begging looks like pushing you away. It looks like getting in trouble. You know, like my friend's place was literally one of the only organizations that didn't throw me away, where like I had done so many things, so many things. If those cameras held footage, my God, like outside of the building, like my God, you know what I mean? But the thing is that knowing that they saw me through all of the trauma, they saw me through the circumstances, they saw me through the behavioral, forms of expressing the pain that was all that I had to access. And they loved me through that, and so that if there were just to be one thing that I leave you with, again, it's to be more realistic about what that looks like and how that shows up in young people. You will have some of the young people who come in and they're just like, and they're happy and they're glad to see you. And I think that the magic of doing this work and the magic of working with youth is knowing that first encounter that you had and watching that person bloom and blossom and watching the light turn on in them again, in a way that maybe they haven't even seen in years. You can assign a value to that. You can. And even though like I'm doing like a lot of amazing things in the world, and I think that the best job I ever had in my life is when I was working with homeless youth after being a homeless youth myself, when I was working for the Gay and Lesbian Center in LA, because I understood them in a way that sometimes you just have to go through it to know and understand. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, with that being said, that's the only advice that I would give.
I think that's so great. And one of the trainings at my friend's place that they thought was powerful for us was they just went around a circle and someone was shaking the water bottle and they were just saying all the different things that a person that comes in the doors of my friend's place could face before they hit breakfast, and just to get you in the mind space of all of the different traumas and things that are happening that's just going to explode. And so just to get you into that space that it is messy, and how, excuse my language, fucking powerful that is, of seeing someone for who they are, and that just cutting through of that love and that light when that goes on. Thank you so much.
Before it comes from, like that trust you're not the first stop. Typically, places like my friend's place, it was my last stop. You know what I mean? Like I had been everywhere, I had tried everything. And so many times people had made these platitudes and promises and told me that it was going to be different, told me that I would always have a home there, told me that I would always have what I need, told me that I would have resources. And each and every single time they did not keep their promise. You know what I mean? And so knowing that you are having to love people through that, and also being in a lot of these institutions and places where they actually discourage those kind of connections. They actually ask you to just keep it very clinical and very like disconnected and very like, and so the thing is that like nobody wants to feel like a number. And at my friend's place, I actually had a name. And so I have to jump off in a second, but I say this constantly. There's never a time that my friend's place will ever reach out to me. And if I can't be there, I won't, because of the simple fact that I truly believe in the work that they do and everything that people are celebrating me for today. All of the magazine covers and articles and headlines and campaigns and like cool things that I get to do as a productive member of society. It started with the seed of investment in my dignity that my friend's place gave me. And for that, I'm forever grateful.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So great. Thank you, Ashlee Marie. All right, who wants to jump in? And we're just talking about, now we're literally at 5 minutes, so I think we will just go into the space of what is that you want to leave people with, what that action item that they can do, so that this isn't just sitting and listening, but that we can take this and really take it to the next step for people who want to support.
I'll go. I think for specifically for those who work in some way with youth and young adults experiencing homelessness, I think it really starts with just being able to identify what barriers that young people are still facing in accessing services. I think that still looks like how do we remove as much as possible homophobia and transphobia out of the systems as well, that we're asking young people to come and seek. I think, one of my really close friends and colleagues, Caleb, had said the other day, like, it's not that like the youth don't want to come to your services, but that your services are just like out of touch, right? And I think as providers are watching this and probably a lot of other things that they've seen over the past few months, just of us saying, you know, how do we create these more equitable spaces for young people? I think it's important to carry that and ensure that like services that are being provided for young people, specifically LGBTQ young people, are done so in a way that's destigmatizing for them and also accepting and welcoming for them, and also allows for them to say like, hey, this is a hell of a way to get sheltered, but I made it through the system. Excuse me, here's some recommendations for how do we make this better, and then actually do something with that, right? Allow like these young people with such vast experiences, such vast differences in their experiences, to be able to really influence how services work for them. So I think that's one thing for those that may not be on the inside in that capacity, but are advocates or activists, or you know, just kind of like supporters. You can never dig too deep into your pockets and give to organizations, specifically organizations that are going to hold themselves accountable to those who they serve, and also hold themselves accountable to really dismantling systems of oppression that show up in housing and in housing anyways, right? And so if anytime a young person says like, man, I wish Ashlee Marie was still around, but as they were saying, you know, not being able to access services and show up as trans, right? That should just never be a thing anymore. And I think we should focus on investing into organizations and into communities that say we're going to do the work to make sure that like no trans person, specifically no Black or brown trans person, ever has to navigate something like that again. I think that's really like where we can start at, right? If we're going to talk about like what can just the average person do. And then I think just for like my fellow activists, advocates, right? We can never just like do enough, but what we can do is just stop to self-care every now and then, and know that like we don't always hold the weight to have all of the answers and to answer all of the questions and to be graceful in everything we say. But I think sometimes we can kind of like step back and see like who is it that we've influenced, who's in our network that we can say like, hey, I've been holding this space for a very long time. Let me step away and allow a different voice for a change to just kind of step up and lead some of the conversations. And I think that's okay too. And I think that also helps some of those young people who may say, you know what, you've been a great leader for us, but we just kind of want a different voice, right? And I think that's helpful as well. I know some people might take it as like a hit to their ego, but if we're really in this work together, then that shouldn't come off to a problem. So those are the last things I'll leave.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your work. I think it's so important to talk about knowing when to step out and to do self-care and to lead by example, to show other people that they can also take time off. I think sometimes like it's so important for the managers to be the ones who are taking the time off and showing that to their team, that to lead by that. And I also just love how True Colors works with My Friend's Place, and that collaboration there. I think so many times it's so unfortunate to see organizations who are competitive over different spaces, but how important it is to really work together in that space. So thank you so much for that. Kayla, do you want to go? And then Mr. Brian Michael, you can bring us home.
Yeah, I'll go. I'll keep it quick, but I'm also super starstruck and want to hear what Brian Michael has to say. So I'm gonna make it super quick. So first, just kind of on what Dee was saying, and this is not a plug for MFP unless you want it to be. I would say donate to the organizations that are doing the work, especially those who are doing it right and constantly reflecting on how they are serving the youth or whichever population you choose. I'll also say that those who identify as cisgender and straight have a different privilege to just be out in the world and do them. And with that comes a different level of responsibility. So I'll leave it at be clear, be bold about your allyship. It could be something as small as a bathroom sign, which I've only recently been able or started to appreciate since cutting my hair. I used to have long locks and now I got short hair, and I've grown a deeper appreciation for bathroom signs. And it could be whatever. It could be a protest. It could be a rainbow sign on the door. I know that LGBTQ youth are and have reason to be distrustful of systems that have just pretty much wronged them in every way possible. So it's that much more important to be visible about your allyship so that they know when and where they can take off that armor if they choose to do so.
That's awesome. Again, thank you so much for your work. I am so jazzed to get to meet you in person too, and just hear even more about My Friend's Place and what you're doing.
Can't wait.
Mr. Brian Michael.
Yeah, Kayla D. I mean, honestly, I can't say too much after that, But if I could say anything, I would just say, you got two resources that you can give right now, and that's that time or that money. So if you can pick one or the other, but you got to give it. I mean, it's one thing to let your heart be open and to think about wonderful things, but you got to show up. You just have to show up, and it means the world to the young people to have people showing up. If you're a chaperone at a dance, whenever we open, the community spaces back up, that goes a long way. You can show up as a mentor. If you're working in some job, you can just talk about how you got to where you are. Young people especially need to see that there is a future for them. So either donate money so that you can help keep the programs that support them open, or show up yourself and just share your story, share your time, and just care. But it goes a long, long way. So please, you got the My Friend's Place organization. You got these organizations. There's so many organizations right now that they are going through it because of COVID. So this would be an excellent time to step up and open up those wallets, make those phone calls, hit those emails up, get the PayPals, hit the Cash apps, and just please show up with that time or with that money.
Amazing. And if, as you said, if you don't have the money, you have the time. And if you don't have the time, that's okay too. You have the energy to be sending it to those organizations. But in My Friend's Place, even though they are technically closed for volunteers, there's ways on their website you can find to still be able to volunteer, whether that is online or through donating clothes. There's just some different specifications to make sure that we're safe around it. But My Friend's Place is awesome. And a lot of the different organizations serving the homelessness, people experiencing homelessness in LA have shut down, but My Friend's Place has opened up and to even expand the reach to people that are outside the age group. So the incredible staff who was there, like Kayla, day in and day out, and they've moved the services outside, and it's hot in LA. So let's also take care of the staff, the incredible staff day in and day out. So thank you guys so much for your time. I know that there were some questions that we didn't get to the questions for people watching, but My Friend's Place staff will follow up there. And again, thank you guys so much for your time, and we will meet again soon. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.